And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce the Dean of the College of Engineering, Cheryl Ehrman.
Thanks, Lisa. So as Lisa said, happy noon. Today it's my pleasure to start our Fall 2019 Silicon Valley Leaders Symposium by introducing Tatjana Rmus, Director of Business Operations for Power Generation at Pacific Gas and Electric Company. So if you've been following the news, we'll just say that we're really excited that she could take some time out of her very busy 12-hour shifts in the Emergency Command Center to come down and talk to us today. I'm also really excited to share that Ms. Rmus earned her Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering, which is my field, from the University of Waterloo in Ontario, Canada, and then an MBA from McGill University, Montreal. She's also a graduate of the Executive Education programs at the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley and Stanford University's Graduate School of Business. Before working at PG&E, she worked from 1994 to 2006 in the natural gas pipeline sector at Enbridge. Her work was primarily in pipeline damage prevention operations, customer attachment operations, and managing several large pipeline construction projects. Ms. Rmus joined PG&E in 2006, and she has held several positions with them over the years in the areas of energy procurement, energy supply, and even finance. Her current responsibilities include long-term asset management planning, operational and financial performance management, and risk and compliance management, all related to PG&E's electric generation portfolio. So once again, please help me welcome our first speaker for Fall 2019, Ms. Tatjana Rmus, Director of Business Operations for Power Generation at PG&E. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me. I can't believe I'm the first speaker of your series, and that thrills me. Really happy to be here, especially with what's going on in the news right now. It's a really challenging time for our company, and as the Dean said earlier, we have a lot going on right now, but I wouldn't have missed this for anything because it gives me such great pleasure to reach out to young people like yourselves. Having been one myself many years ago, I know that I've been influenced by a lot of people that I interacted with throughout my education, and so I know how very important it is to be able to engage with our leaders of tomorrow, which I hope each and every one of you sees yourself as. So we're going to talk about a couple of things today, and before we do, I wanted to also introduce a couple of other leaders of tomorrow and a few leaders of yesterday. If you heard about my background, I went to some Canadian schools. I'm originally from Toronto, Canada. And it just so happens that my parents happened to be visiting from Toronto, so I asked them to come along. I don't think they've ever seen me speak, so I've got them here. So please welcome Tina and Dushan Rmus. And let me just say, Tina is an engineer, Dushan is an engineer. My brother is an engineer. My cousin is an engineer. Uncle Lecco is an engineer. Who else? So anyway, I can go on, but to be honest, and you'll hear more about this, I actually found myself quite by accident going to engineering school myself. The other leaders of tomorrow that I'd like to introduce are my kids. So when I mentioned to my son, Stefan, you want to raise your hand? That I would be going to a university and would he like to come? And he said, will I miss any school? I said, yes. He's like, I'm there. And then my daughter Eleanor, who's here with me too, who's a 6th grader, I asked her if she would like to come today too. And she said, will I miss any school? And I said, yes. And she's like, I got science. I got to work on the science fair, Mom. I don't know if I can be there. So she's brought her homework. So let's give a little round of applause to a little diligent. And let's also remind her later today that not only is life about studying hard, working hard, but also about having some fun. So a reminder for all of us today, especially when there's so much going on in the world. So we're going to talk a little bit about me. Oh, sorry. You know what? I'm going to need my glasses, I think. Mom, can you toss me my glasses, please? We're going to talk a little bit about me. I'm going to talk about the energy industry at large, and a little bit about PG&E as well, and just talk a little bit about some of the different kinds of challenges that engineers get into, both at PG&E and in the energy industry. Now, I get the sense that most of you are a mix of, upper year, lower year, kind of just fresh. How many, is this your first year of school here? Okay, a couple. And how many are soon to graduate? A couple more. Yeah, that's great. So real nice diversity of all the different years here. How many of you have had internships in your summer, working in fields that support what you're studying? A couple, great, that's good. So we're going to talk a little bit about the engineering industry as it applies to the energy industry as well. But first, we're going to talk a little bit about me. It's all about me. As mentioned, I'm the director of the business operations function for the power generation line of business. And we have a pretty big portfolio of generation assets at PG&E. We have 66 hydroelectric powerhouses, 3 natural gas-fired stations. We've got some solar, and keeping those all reliable so that they're providing energy to California is a pivotal thing that I work on every day in support of the operations of the business. And part of that includes planning for the future. What that means is making sure that we have the adequate funds, resources, people to keep our equipment reliable and providing safe, clean, efficient energy for Californians. I joined PG&E in 2006, maybe backing up just a little bit from there. Let's go way back first. I mentioned earlier that I found myself in the engineering function, studying engineering, quite by accident. So let me tell you a little bit about that. As I introduced, my family as having sort of a history of the engineering space. When I was in high school, I really only saw 2 professions in this world. If you were good in the arts, you became a lawyer, and if you were good in the maths and sciences, you became a doctor. And that's kind of how I saw the world, a little bit black and white. And so I was kind of good in both. I was a pretty good student all the way around, but I had a bit more of a knack for math and science and enjoyed those a lot more. I particularly enjoyed biology. And so thought I was on this course. I was going to be a doctor, thinking I'm going to make a lot of money. It's going to be great. I'm going to help people. Awesome. And in before senior year, at the end of junior year, I went to my homeroom teacher to collect my grades for the year. Where I went to high school at the end in June, you would go in on a specific day to collect your grades. And my homeroom teacher said, here are your grades, great job as usual, and so on. And then he said, hey, I noticed that you have not signed up for algebra for next year. And I said, well, I don't need algebra. Right? I'm taking calculus, I've got finite math, your trig. Don't need it. I'm fine without it. And he said, well, you do realize that if you want to go to an engineering school, you're going to need it. It's a prerequisite. And I was like, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to become a doctor, and I'm going to study science, and it's all good. And he wouldn't let it go. You really should think about taking algebra. You may need algebra. Have you thought about engineering as an option? No, I was pretty stubborn, and then honestly it became a bit of a war of wills, and I said, fine, I'll sign up for algebra. And guess what? Best decision ever. And really kind of one of those critical, pivotal times in one's life where what seems like a very small decision puts you on a completely different path. Had I not signed up for algebra, I would not have had the prerequisites to go on the path that I went on. So what happened during the course of the year? What made me switch from deciding to be a doctor to an engineer? Well, one of my classmates said, well, you know, if you become an engineer, you can still be a doctor afterwards. And I was like, great idea. I'm going to sign up for engineering school. And I'm going to sign up for chemical engineering, so then I get all my organic chemistries and a lot of the prerequisites for med school anyway. It's a twofer. So that's what I did. And then along the way, as I got more entrenched in the school and enjoyed my course of studies, I thought, you know, this is actually a pretty good path, and this is a path I'm going to stick to, and I'm really enjoying it. I also went to a school that happened to have what's called a co-op program. And a co-op, and I'm not sure if that's available here at San Jose State, but, and that's why I asked about internships earlier. It provided me with opportunities to work in an engineering field at an actual employer who could potentially hire me one day after I graduated from college. So in addition to my resume that lists the places I've worked at after graduating, I also got to work at some really great companies such as Procter & Gamble, designing new diapers, you know, kind of, and seeing what diaper equipment looks like. It's bigger than this room, and the amount of technology that goes into those darn things is crazy. I learned all kinds of new stuff there. I worked at a nuclear plant. It was really fun studying how things corrode and how to prevent them from corroding. I worked at an oil and gas company, just a little one, you might know it as Exxon, and developed IT systems. Totally not an IT person, by the way, but I got the opportunity. So if any message that you take away from our discussion today is about little decisions can put you on some really wild paths in your life. Take every opportunity that comes your way. Be flexible in your thinking about what your career choices are. Engineering is so wonderful because you can leapfrog from one career to another. I've seen colleagues do it. I've done it myself. My resume shows I went to business school. I can't think of, you know, any type of study any better than engineering to foster creativity of thought, movement, and innovation that spawns just wonderful things for one's career and one's future. So, back to sort of the resume. After I graduated, I worked for a large natural gas pipeline company, in fact, the largest in North America now, and did all kinds of really wonderful things and was in a program that allowed me to work to higher degrees of management. So I started off in engineering, actually doing design work of pipelines, to project management, to people management, to management of really big issues like damage prevention. Damage prevention is basically making sure that in a day-to-day operation of your pipeline, nothing bad happens to it, which is a really big thing. Keeping the public safe is really, really key and really important. I can't stress that enough. Because I went to a Canadian school, we actually wear something called an iron ring. Has anyone ever heard of that? No? Okay, so when you graduate from most Canadian schools, as an engineer, you take an oath. And one of those oaths are to protect the public, to put safety first, and to make sure that you also have to take a course before you do this, all about the law and your duty to the public. And so putting safety first is a paramount piece of your leadership in the future as well. And you might not seem that way. Some of you might go to work for a tech company like an Uber or Cruise designing new driverless vehicles. That's all about safety. Some of you may go into, I don't know, Facebook and help them reach out to more people. We see a lot in that safety framework around what's going on in social media, be it bullying and people's personal safety, or whether it's the safety of our voting system. Really, this element of safety really is so foundational to your role in leading tomorrow. So it's another thing I want to make sure you leave this room with, is that not only do you have an education when you leave this place, you have a responsibility and a duty to the public. Okay, very heavy message. All right, so a little bit more about me. At PG&E, and actually I'll just go to this next slide. Energy being fundamental to our modern world. And I mentioned that at PG&E we have a whole host of different assets that we manage. When you think about how vast and how big a population we have in California, what I do gives me immense pleasure in terms of being foundational to the way we live and protecting the public as well. Energy being fundamental to our modern world, I can only imagine that every single one of you has some form of electronic device on you right now, be it a phone or an iPad. Does anyone not have an electronic device on them now? Not including you two in the corner. Right. No hands except for the elementary school kids put their hands up. This is incredibly fundamental to the way that we live today. And guess what? Something that we take for granted day in and day out does not come easily. There is a whole infrastructure, and I'm sure some of you may be painfully aware of this today. Has anybody actually got their power out at their home? There are a couple of you guys, yeah, out there, yeah. Yeah, it is a complex network of technology. Managing it is an every second of every day kind of activity. And what's behind the scenes when you turn on that light switch is an incredible infrastructure. It includes both the generating technology itself, and this is the space that I work in, the distribution and transmission controls. I know many of you are taking electrical engineering, and the control space is a really thriving field. All the way out to the end users, which many of us are, and I am too. We also have an incredible natural gas network as well of compression, storage, and pipeline delivery. And this energy landscape is ever changing. And it's been really interesting for me when I started at the pipeline company right out of graduation, and I was being interviewed for my job. I remember my interviewer, who I later came to work for, saying, well, we see you have good grades and you're a real leader at school. What do you think about digging holes and putting pipes in them? And I was like, great, sign me up. Lying through my teeth, of course. And it seemed like a very basic kind of industry to get involved in. And I was like, this is a good job. I'll have a nice solid job with pension years down the road. Not at all anticipating what kinds of change could befall the energy industry at all. Especially here in California. And I moved here about 15 years ago. And California is such an interesting place to do business in, especially in energy. We have environmental leadership policies addressing climate change like no other in the world. Some of those key policies are up there. Assembly Bill 32 and the Greenhouse Gas Cap and Trade Program, SB 100, that is moving California to 100% clean energy by 2050. That's incredible. Those are big, lofty goals here. And for those of you who recognize that's not where we are today, we're only at about 30 or 40% of renewable energy right now. We have some pretty big challenges to get there. And that goes into the second driver of change, rapidly advancing technology, and some of it at reduced cost. When I first came to PG&E, we were very worried as a company. California had introduced a 20% renewable standard, meaning that we had to implement 20% of our energy coming from renewable resources. And that seemed pretty lofty. And then in the midst of that, in 2010, it got bumped up to 33%, then 40%. And now you see SB 100 is taking us up to 100% by some point in the future. It's really quite incredible how the policy and how the technology tie together. Back in 2006, solar panels were at an incredible cost, and they've come down substantially. Rooftop solar has dropped over 15 cents a kilowatt hour. You see now that you can get a Tesla Model 3 for like $25,000. Battery technology has advanced significantly. And we expect that it'll continue to change. Lithium-ion prices, a 73% drop in just a few years. All of that is coming together in such a way that there will be significant advancements in technology enabling us to get to that 100% clean energy future. Lastly, increasing customer choice and engagement. There's increasing demand for cleaner technology because people want that. You know, every day it seems I look at the news and there's something there to depress me about the state of our world from an environmental standpoint. Whether it's about the great garbage patch that's out in the middle of the ocean, or the fact that Greta Thunberg is at the United Nations trying to address and drive a message about climate change. The tide is turning in terms of what people want and where they will put their money, most importantly. And that is another reason that the energy industry is changing in response to customer wishes and demands. So you see more electric vehicles, you see more solar homes, smart homes, more solar on rooftops, et cetera. And that's all changing and makes it, that complex network that I showed you up top a slide ago, makes that complex network all the more complicated. And another reason we need bright minds to solve those kinds of engineering challenges. This slide here just kind of reinforces additionally what I said earlier about the clean energy goals of the state and how they've been changing. So prior to, in 2002, the state implemented the 20% goal. And when I came to PG&E, it was 2006, we were working towards that goal, which then changed midstream on us and continued to increase. And we now have the 100% of electric retail sales from zero carbon energy by 2045. So pretty incredible and really industry leading for the world. A little bit about PG&E specifically. I wanted to show you some statistics on how we're doing in terms of our electric power mix as well. So we're currently delivering 33% from renewable resources. Those are resources that the state designates as renewable. But if you look at all the other green sections on this pie chart, we're getting to a number around 70% of our energy coming from non-GHG emitting sources. So large hydro doesn't technically count as renewable, even though it does not emit any emissions. Nuclear also is GHG free, and there are various stances on nuclear, but we're actually shutting down our nuclear plant in 2025. Our own generation is spread out across the state, from the north to the south. What we're calling, all those little dots you see are various hydroelectric power plants, and these are really interesting. The average age of our assets is about 75 years old. A lot of this technology has been around for a really, really long time. some of which actually date back to the gold rush era. Can you imagine? It's really, really cool being in some of these powerhouses up in the Sierras, you know, surrounded by these beautiful mountains, crystal blue waters, and these little powerhouses that are producing electricity for the state and have been for like 100 years. It's really incredible. But adopting that technology to today's modern grid and implementing new controls is a real challenge for us. We also have something called a pumped storage facility, which is really quite incredible too. Every time I'm there, I'm just amazed by it. Does anybody know what a pumped storage facility is? I take for granted that everybody knows what a hydroelectric facility is. Yeah? You're basically using the kinetic energy from running water and the potential energy from it running at a high elevation to drive a turbine. Well, a pumped storage is essentially a giant battery. It's the most efficient kind of battery that's out there. And essentially what it represents is two different reservoirs, one at a higher level and one at a lower level. And in the middle you have an asset that can run in one direction and generate electricity when you're running water from the higher reservoir to the lower one. And then you can operate backwards and pump that water back up a hill and take energy off the grid, which is really important at times when solar energy is at its peak during the day, in and around the noon to 2 p.m. period when it's really sunny outside. And we actually have an over-generation situation. PG&E also has state-of-the-art fossil generating stations. We've got the newest ones in the state, and they emit dramatically less carbon than most others of their sort. Sure. It's stored in the form of potential energy by the water being back up the hill again. It's really fascinating. And this asset is in the middle of a mountain. So you drive down into this cave to get into this. It's like Batman or something. It's the craziest thing. Whenever I'm there, I'm inside, and I'm like, I am in the middle of a mountain. I can't believe it. And it's this giant cave with these giant turbines inside, and the whole infrastructure is just incredible. The fact that it exists just amazes me. But the fact that it provides so much value to us as users of electricity is really quite something. It can take about 900 megawatts of electricity off of the grid and generate about 1,400 megawatts when it's producing power. It's just an incredible facility, and we're really fortunate that we've built it. By the way, are there any other questions yet on anything else I've said? Okay. So we talked about, oh, yes. Let's see here. So this is the power mix that includes both PG&E plus power purchases. So this is the portfolio of both power that we generate and power that we buy. And what's really interesting, when I first started at PG&E, that ratio was we generated about 30 to 40% of the power we deliver in our service territory with our own generating assets, and we bought the rest. And that dynamic is kind of shifting. And now we're actually generating more with our own assets. It's almost reversed to almost a 50-50 to almost a 60-40 split because of a lot of different changes going on in the energy markets. But this is reflective of our total portfolio. So our total portfolio is like 78% green, which is leading in the industry, leading in the country, possibly leading in the world too. Thank you for your question. we talked a little bit, or I talked a little bit about the policy that California is driving with a green renewable future. And what makes it really challenging is the integration of those intermittent renewable resources with specifically solar. Because guess what? Newsflash. Listening? Sun doesn't shine at night. Doesn't, right? So what are you going to do? You have to integrate, and the wind doesn't always blow. And it blows at times you don't want it to, like today, we have to shut down the power. But it presents a really interesting challenge from how you integrate all of these different kinds of resources onto the grid in such a way to keep your costs as low as possible, because we certainly don't want to pass on any more cost to you than we have to. And so, has anyone ever seen this? It's affectionately known in the industry as the duck curve. And what it reflects is, so these are the hours of the day, 12 a.m. out 24 hours. And so demand is at a certain level and generation is at a certain level, and it kind of follows this curve here. So around 12, middle of the day, that's where your demand is going to be your highest. Everybody's like doing stuff, and then it kind of lulls, and then everybody comes home at the end of the day and they cook, they do things that consume power, they turn on their televisions, and then everybody goes to bed. The world kind of shuts down for a bit, right? Well, that used to be the curve that we would follow, and we would load up our generating assets in such a way that we would follow that curve. We turn them on, ramp them up for noon, pretty straightforward. Then all the solar started coming on, and all of a sudden you have this new source of energy. So if you net out the solar, you start having this demand curve that drops and drops and drops and drops, meaning that solar is providing the demand during these points of the day. The demand hasn't changed, but the supply has changed, and this is what this graph is trying to show you. And over time, this gets deeper and deeper and deeper. So what? Why is this important? Well, what you have are these very steep sections here, where you have to ramp up and ramp down quickly at certain parts of the day. And guess what? Who's a mechanical engineer? Excellent. What happens when you're turning your stuff on and off and on and off and on and off? Does equipment like that? No. Very challenging. It'll break down. It wasn't designed to do that in the first place. I just said some of our equipment's 100 years old. It's designed to turn on, leave it on, bring you energy reliably and safely all the time. It's not, our grid is not designed to do that either. And this is a huge engineering challenge, actually. Trying to integrate all these layers of resources dispersed across the state in a way that was never designed when the grid was designed. The other graph over there more or less tells you the same thing in a different way, so I'm not going to explain that one other than it just talks about curtailment. And another interesting feature is that solar panels don't like to be turned off either. So what happens is you either have to shut down whole plants, or you have to pay them to keep generating and figure out how you're going to suck that power off the grid. And that's where our Helms pump storage comes into play. It's a giant battery that we charge up by sucking power off the grid. And hopefully, in the future, Mr. Elon Musk or somebody else, or maybe one of you, will design some utility storage capability in either lithium ion or some other technology that will help us solve this problem. So please graduate soon. Here's another challenge. We talked about customer choice, creating a grid that supports customer choice. A little bit of a repeat here on the message is that, there's a growing demand around what people want. They want clean energy. They want solar. They want clean transportation. and their batteries, all with a view to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which is desirable both by our population and our public policy, right? And so it's really creating that grid that supports that customer choice is another engineering challenge. Advancing technology, building the grid of the future, and advancing our operations. Well, there's a lot of other things that have changed in this world by way of technology and by the way people operate. A couple things. Does anyone own a drone? Yeah, don't be shy. My son wants one more than anything. It's okay. Drones are kind of fun, right? And so now we're able to utilize drones in actually inspecting equipment. I mentioned some of our assets are up in the mountains, our hydroelectric facilities. These towers are way up in the air. Is it safe to get somebody up there? Well, you can do it, and you can do it safely, but hey, you can send a drone up there and take a few pictures about what's going on and have a much clearer picture of what's going on with that asset now. So there's a lot going on in the space around improving our system resiliency by using better control systems and technology that can let us get to assets and take really close-up photos about what's going on. Our operations technology, our whole operations is changing too. We've got mobile platforms now for how we do business, meaning that the guys who are in trucks out, servicing our customers and servicing our lines, we're needing to get them up to speed on how to use mobile devices in a way that makes them work more efficiently and effectively. We're trying to use machine learning in understanding our assets and trying to be more predictive in terms of our maintenance and our planning. And data management is a huge space that, when I started in this industry, wasn't even really a concept. And let's not forget cybersecurity. Is anybody like a computer engineer here? Yeah. Are there classes that you take in cyber, in the cyberspace, or in security? Yeah. Another super interesting space. Does anyone know who Ted Koppel is? Are you guys familiar? He's a newscaster. I don't know if he's still on the news. But not too long ago, he wrote a book, I want to say called Blackout. And the thing that he said, the single thing that a terrorist organization who really wants to take out the United States could do is wipe out the electric infrastructure. And so we now spend a lot of our energy and a lot of time and money on the topic of cybersecurity. So lots of change in this industry, particularly in that area. I remember, now I know many of you are too young, but in 2003, I was still living in Canada at the time, and pretty much the whole east coast of the United States and Canada lost power for almost a week. Some areas came back after 3-4 days, but it was just an incredible experience to live through and really demonstrative of the fact that energy is really foundational to a modern existence, the one that we pretty well take for granted. So, as we think about, some of these challenges that I presented, how might your skills apply in the future? I've kind of tried to weave that construct in to some of the things that I've talked about today. But when we look at the kinds of skills that we need as a company and as an industry and as a society, it's all of the things that you guys are studying here today and more. I put a few on here that are equally important. Technical writing, modeling and forecasting, economics, computer program, all critical kinds of education needed in our society to sustain, really, the kind of existence we have today. So that is, a message about our careers at PG&E around what we're doing to build a better California, how your own experiences could play into that, and whether or not that's a career path for you. I would really like to thank each and every one of you for coming here today and leave you some time to just ask me general questions about anything that I've discussed today.
So we're happy to take questions. There were a couple questions asked during, but I'm sure folks in the audience have more questions. Okay, I have one because I'm really intrigued about the battery, the pumping station. Mm-hmm. And are there plans to create more of those in the state?
We would love that to happen. In fact, I've been on some projects myself to evaluate that. I'm speaking on my own personal experience. I think that will happen in California at some point in the future because I personally don't see battery technology advancing quickly enough in the way that solar did. But the challenge to developing something like the Helms pump storage that we have today is finding the right site because it's very site specific. You need kind of the right elevations of 2 different reservoirs. You need the state to be supportive by way of having the permitting. The state, doesn't want to build more dams or change the flow of rivers any more than we already have today. So some of it is going to be a policy and politics kind of scenario. And secondly, money. The way power prices work today don't necessarily translate into an economic model that makes sense to build something like this now. And something will need to change for that to work.
Interesting. Other questions? We have a question back here.
Hello. I'm not very caught up on politics and such, so I was actually unaware of the bill regarding the 100% goal that we have. And I was wondering how feasible do you think it actually is, and do you know if it's geared towards changing all of society or just federal funded PG&E kind of thing or something like that?
Good question. So I'll just repeat it and make sure I understood your question. You want to get a perspective on whether you think 100% GHG-free future is feasible in energy?
Especially by 2045.
So let me just get my crystal ball out. Hold on. A bit of sense of humor. So I think that working towards those goals is a feasible future. Note that it is not just renewable power, but GHG-free power, right? So there are, large hydro plays a role in that, very much so. I think that we wouldn't be where we are today in California with such a high percentage of GHG-free energy already had it not been for those policies being put in place and companies striving to work towards them. Even though the goalposts keep kind of moving along, everybody's moving along with it, right? Where it will get tricky is in this notion of the battery technology and how much natural gas we want to have in the state in order to support those ramps ups and downs that we talked about with the duck curve. But I think that that future is entirely a plausible one.
Yeah, these are great questions. Other questions? Maybe from this half. Yeah. Oh, Professor Okamoto.
Hi. There are a lot of communities these days who are looking at eliminating natural gas in future residential construction. I was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
That is entirely an option and part of the whole customer choice piece that we talked about here. So some communities are electing to do that because they will be putting solar on roofs. Or taking some other means to make sure that they have energy available to them by greater use of electric resources. It's entirely a customer choice kind of issue.
First, I have two questions, but now since some of them, they already asked the question I want to ask. My question, how do you balance work life and your personal life? Yes, you would like to share, if you don't mind sharing.
Oh, I don't mind sharing. That is really a great question. And if you didn't hear it, the question is, how do you balance your work life and your personal life? And I would love nothing more to stand up here and say, it's easy. But it's not. If you saw me a few minutes ago before Kim, I was like screaming at the two of them in the parking lot. It's like, we got to get there, come on, like, you know, and it's a challenge each and every day. But it's a great challenge to have, a great problem to have, right? How do you balance work and personal life? It really helps to work with like-minded folks who value family. So I'm very fortunate to have a boss who is very supportive of family life. And you guys may have also seen her speak here before. And so working in an environment with like-minded people who have that value and a company that has that value is really key. If you have a family with a spouse, you really have to kind of negotiate all the time around who's doing what and when. Scheduling is always a challenge. Some of the things that we do are, trying to put aside time to kind of manage the schedule, figure out where do the kids have to be, where do we have to be, are there other tasks that we have to do? So it's a real challenge all the time. I'm still looking for the magic bullet there, but it's definitely a real challenge for women too, and a consideration in what career path you take. So great question. You have a follow-up?
Yeah, I have a follow-up. The reason why I asked because I'm a mother of two as well, and I want to know if you have any special technique that you do. But I do the same thing. Manage with my husband that he do some part, and I do schedules. Scheduling is a key.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In as advanced planning as possible is really, I think, the key. And even still, I don't know that I necessarily have it quite locked down. I don't know if I've met anyone who has. Even when I think, I have a lot of professional friends who are, run the gambit of other engineers, doctors, lawyers, like whatever other profession. And sometimes it really helps to just chat with other moms to kind of hear about things that they do and sympathize with each other, because it is really, really challenging, especially if you have a career with a tremendous amount of pressure too. So it helps to kind of have that network of folks to plug into who are also similarly understanding and may also be able to help by like, hey, I can pick up your kids from soccer and bring them to your home afterwards. So we do a lot of that too. You're welcome. Yes?
Do you expect solar to be 75% of the to provide the energy in the future? Solar from customer
Rooftop solar? I'm not sure 75% is a projection that we have as a company, but it will continue to grow, that's for sure. And in California in particular. But I recall seeing one of our last statistics about 1 in 5 solar panels on a residential home in the United States is in California. So we have the most solar penetration of anywhere in the United States, and that will continue. It also plays out with the fact we have so much sun. We will continue to have growth in solar. Whether or not it's at 75%, I don't know that we will necessarily get to that number, but it will certainly continue to grow.
Great, we've got a question here.
Yeah, so I have a question that PG&E gives passes claims for the customers at some points. If there is a what do we say? If a customer claims regarding overbilling or it has some problem in for wildfires, the PG&E gives claims for that customer. So I wanted to know that how much percentage of your income would be the claims, because I'm making a report on it. So.
Sorry, what percentage of our claims are associated with wildfire?
Yeah, with wildfire as well as overbilling, or due to the mistake of the customer has been overbilled and he has claimed for that in the company, that this is not my problem or something like that.
I'm not sure I understand the overbilling question, part of the question.
So if the customer is having a faulty device at his place which consumes more power, so due to that, sometimes overbilling might take place, but the customer thinks that the company is charging me unnecessarily.
I think what you're referring to is what's called net energy metering. So if you have a solar facility on your roof and you're creating power during the time that the sun is shining and you're not using all of it, you can send it back onto the grid. And then at nighttime, you're using energy back from the grid, right? And that net sometimes washes itself out, and sometimes it doesn't. It's either you're generating more and putting more onto the grid, and you're like a net creator of energy, or you're a net user of energy. And I think what you're talking about is if you're a net creator of energy, you get overbilled.
No, if I'm just using natural energy, I'm not using solar panels.
Okay.
So if there is a device that is faulty and it uses more energy than claimed.
Oh, and energy is faulty. The equipment is faulty?
Yeah, so if it uses more energy than claimed and I am getting overbilled, so if I think that I am being overbilled, I'll go to the company and inquire that why am I being overbilled, I'm not using this much energy.
So if the device that you're using is faulty and it's something that you own in your home or in your business, and it's using an excess amount of energy, then that's a device that you need to replace. That's not part of PG. We're just billing you for whatever is consumed. So if the device is faulty in some way and using more than it claims to or something like that, then that would be an issue with the device.
Yeah, if you want to ask that question and get the details one-on-one after.
Yeah, I'll be here for a while, so
okay, I think we
can
have
dig
one
into
other
that.
question on this side, and then when I see a hand up on that side, then I think those will be our questions. So this.
Hi, so I'm trying to make this into a question, but I believe that San Jose requires at least a minimum of 2.5 kilowatt solar system on all new developments.
Mm-hmm.
So like you had mentioned, that's sort of making the duck curve a lot steeper.
Mm-hmm.
And then one way you're trying to mitigate the steepness of the duck curve is by installing more hydro pumps. However, let's say battery technology improves and more people instead have batteries into their own home, which should then sort of flatten out the duck curve a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the case, how does PG&E's business model sort of adapt to that? So, sort of like less demand on the grid.
Less demand on the grid.
Does that kind of?
Yeah, so there is another bill out there that requires us to help. So like the RPS standard, the Renewable Portfolio Standard that California implemented to raise up the amount of renewables, including solar, in California, there's another bill on the topic of storage. And so all the utilities, not just PG&E, but Southern California Edison and San Diego Gas and Electric, are all required to go to the market to try to foster more storage in the industry. So we have what we call requests for offers out there, which are basically, give us your proposal, tell us what it'll cost, where are you going to put it, we'd like you to build some storage and tell us what it's going to cost to implement that, and then we'll sign a contract with that. But we're finding that there's not enough of these coming into play. We're required to build out or to sign contracts for about 580 megawatts of storage over the next 2 years. And so the public policy is trying to encourage the development of storage technology. We're participating in that as well. So we are incented and supportive of the growth in storage technology.
All right, there was one question on this side. Yeah, okay, this will be our last question.
I have a few.
Just pick your favorite.
So the current trend of adding storage to the grid, I'm personally skeptical of that. So in terms of its scalability,
Yes.
so I'm curious about what are other technologies that are present or other ideas that are being.
There's some really interesting. Great, keep going.
What are other technologies or ideas that are being put on the table today that could help solve the problem that
Great. Yes.
the generation ramping is causing?
Super question. I love this question. Thank you. So, battery storage, lithium-ion batteries in particular, are one type of storage, chemical storage. We have seen proposals for mechanical and thermal storage, and let me tell you what that involves. So, when prices are low on the grid, you have some sort of mechanical device that will raise some heavy mass to some elevation, and then when power prices become high and you need to generate, you drop that mass and create. So you're storing the energy, you're sucking electricity off the grid, you're using it to raise something heavy, and then you let it drop to create, so you can have physical storage like our hydro. We're doing it with water, but you can store anything else in that manner too. And we've seen proposals for like railroad cars and like shipping containers and that sort of thing. I also recently heard from our storage folks about thermal storage, where basically you're freezing something using the excess generation on the grid. You're using it to freeze something, and then that helps run the air conditioning and cooling for your building or your industrial process so that you're not using electricity later. And so that's another interesting sort of proposal that we're seeing. So it doesn't have to be like lithium-ion batteries in just a room full of batteries, because I agree with you. I don't think we're seeing in the battery space what we saw in the solar panel space. There's a physical limitation, it's called chemistry and physics, of the technology itself. And the industry is trying to figure it out, and I really hope that they will, and in an environmentally responsible way. But we are also seeing other kinds of proposals around physical storage and chemical storage and thermal storage as well. So, it's a really interesting space to be involved in right now. Great question.
Yeah, these are all great questions. I'd like to thank the speaker again. Please join me.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.